Okay, grade 8. We are going to do lesson 8, which is quadratic functions. It starts over here on page 335. So this is lesson 8 in chapter 4. Okay? Now, in your success criteria, you must know how to read, how to answer in a complete sentence, how to answer what the question wants, how to answer all the parts to the question, how to define a quadratic function, the facts of a quadratic function. You need to know all the facts of a quadratic function. You need to know how to identify a quadratic function from an equation and from a graph. When you look at a graph, you should know this graph belongs to a quadratic equation. To a quadratic function. If you look at an equation, you must know this equation belongs to a quadratic function. You must know how to draw a function table for a quadratic function. You must know how to graph a quadratic function. You must know how to use the graph of a quadratic function. We are also going to look at the parts. We are going to look at the parts of a quadratic graph. Parts of a quadratic graph. And also parts of a standard form, of a quadratic equation. Okay? All right. So, what is a quadratic function? It is a nonlinear function. Why? Because the points of its graph do not make a straight line. Because the x or the y values are decreasing or increasing by a different value each time. Because the equation has an exponent 2 on x. Okay? So, these 3 reasons you should give when explaining a quadratic function. The quadratic function can be written in the form of y equals to ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is not 0. A cannot be 0. It can be negative, it can be positive, but it cannot be 0. Okay? The power of x will always be 2. If it is another exponent, then it is not quadratic. Quadratic means this will always be 2. Okay, it cannot be any other value but 2. Not negative 2, 2, positive 2. This exponent here should always be positive 2. Okay. The graph of a quadratic function. The graph of a quadratic function is called a parabola. That is the name. So if I ask you what is a parabola, it is the graph of a quadratic function. It is U-shaped. It opens upward or downward. When it opens upward, the coefficient of the variable that is squared is positive. That means A is positive if your graph opens like this. It means A is positive. It can be a decimal, a fraction, or a whole number. Positive. Okay? As long as A is positive, your graph will open upward. It opens downward when the coefficient of the variable that is squared is negative. So it will open this way. If you plot your points and your graph is this way, it's because A is negative. Okay? So that is the reason why. this a, the number that is with the x squared, or this value, this variable can change. It can be m squared, n squared, t squared. So that is why I said the coefficient of the variable that is squared. I didn't say when x is squared because the variable keeps changing. It depends with the question, okay? But just know the variable that has the exponent 2, the number that is in front of it, if it is positive, the graph will look up. If it is negative, the graph will look down. Okay? Now let's look at the facts of a quadratic function. The greatest power of the variable is always 2. 2 will be the highest exponent. You cannot use any other number but 2, and 2 will be the greatest. So that means you cannot have any number less than 2 or any numbers greater than 2, okay? On the x, the graph is nonlinear always. A quadratic function, the graph will always be nonlinear. That means the line will never be straight. The graph sometimes opens upwards and sometimes opens downwards. Okay? Sometimes you'll get the graph to go up and sometimes the graph will go downwards. Alright. So which of these functions are quadratic, and justify your reasoning? So I am looking for x squared. Did I see it? So then yes, this is quadratic. This is not quadratic because this is 3. This is supposed to be 2. If it is not 2, then it is not quadratic. There is an x squared. This is quadratic. There is no x squared, so this is linear. Okay? So now I say these functions that I circled are quadratic because the highest exponent on x is 2. Okay? Which of these functions will the graph open upward? First, I need to make sure they are x squared. So I will circle the quadratic functions. I will circle that. This I will not look. I will look at this. This I will not look because x is not squared. This I will look at it because x is squared. This I will not look at it. This I will look at it because x is squared. Now I want to open upward. It means a should be positive. A should be positive. So here my a is negative. So this is wrong. Here my a is positive. So I will use this. Here my a is positive. So this is correct. Here my a is negative because there's a negative there. This is wrong. So the functions that I circled, the functions that I circled will open upward because the coefficient of the variable, because the coefficient of the variable being squared, or that is squared, is positive. This is the reason. Okay? The functions that I circled, these ones, right here. Or maybe we put them in a box so that we don't confuse. So these are our answers. So the functions that I boxed, will open upward because the coefficient of the variable that is squared is positive. Now, which of these functions open downward? I will look at this because x is squared. I will not look at this because x is cubed. I will not look at this because x does not have a exponent. I will look at this because x is squared. I will look at this because x is squared. I will not look at this because x is not squared. Now we box the one, the a is negative. This is correct because a is negative. This is not correct because a is positive. This is correct because a is negative. So I will box it. Okay, so I have these two. Now I will say the functions that I boxed, will open downward because the coefficient of the variable that is squared is negative. That's how you answer this question. You show why you chose it. Then you box your answer. Always box your answer, okay? Even here, we should have boxed our answer. Box your answer. So the functions that I boxed, not circled, boxed. Okay, the functions that I boxed are quadratic. Here, the functions that I have boxed will open upward. Here, the functions that I have boxed will open downward. Okay, so you first look with the x squared, then you look whether it is negative or positive. Okay, all right. I like writing. Okay. So now, which of these equations represents this table? So what will you do? You will take the values of x, you will put in the equation, you will check if it gives you the y. If it gives you the y, then it's definitely the equation. Now, when I look at this, I already know it could be, it has x and y, so this is definitely wrong because there's no y. And this one is definitely wrong because it says x has to be 0 all the time. X is not 0 all the time. This one is definitely wrong. Okay? Now, I already know this one is wrong, but we will prove why it is wrong. Now, let us do this one. So I will do y equals to 2 bracket negative 2. I should get negative 2 squared. So that means negative 2 squared is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. Okay? So, and this is not 8. So therefore, this is wrong. Now let us try this one. y equals to 2 bracket negative 2 squared plus 7. This is y is equals to negative 2 squared is 4 times 2 is 8. 8 plus 7, which should be 15. And y is not 15, y is 10. Therefore, this is wrong. Now, let us try. And I don't need to do for all of them. If I do the first one and it is wrong, then I check. If I do the first one and it is wrong, then all of them are wrong. If I do the first one and it is correct, I check the second one until I finish checking, okay? All right, so you have to be very careful as to what you're doing. This is negative 2 squared, which is positive 4. Positive 4 times 2 is 8. How do I do that? So it is 2, negative 2, negative 2, like that. Negative 2 times negative 2 is 4. And then 4 times 2 is 8. Okay? Or you can do 2 times negative 2 is negative 4. And negative 4 times a negative 2 is a positive 8. And now let's do this. This is y equals to 3 bracket negative 2 to the 4th power plus 3. Negative 2 to the 4th power is positive 16. How do I know? Negative 2, negative 2, this is 4. Negative 2, negative 2, that is another 4. And 4 times 4 is positive 16. So this is y equals to 3 times 16 plus 3. 3 times 16 should be 48. Plus 3. That should be 51. Okay? And it is wrong. I should already also know, because we are talking about quadratic functions, I shouldn't even bother because my exponent is more than 4. All right, let us do this one. We should also know, since this lesson is about quadratic functions, my exponent should have a 2 over here. It doesn't have a 2, I should not even bother looking, but let's prove that this is wrong. Y equals to 5 bracket negative 2 minus 2. This is negative 10 minus 2. 5 times negative 2 is negative 10. Minus 2 is negative 12. This is not negative 12. Therefore, that one is definitely wrong. Now, let's try this one. Y equals to 4 bracket negative 2 squared minus 6. Negative 2 squared is 4. Y equals to 4 bracket 4 minus 6. 4 times 4 is 16. Minus 6 is 10. I check with the other one. Y equals 4 bracket negative 1 squared minus 6. Negative 1 squared is positive 1. Y equals to 4 minus 6. Y equals to negative 2. So therefore, then you continue. You confirm. It is equals to 0. So this will be 0. 0 minus 6, negative 6. Then the whatever you have that is negative with the same value is the same answer. So if it is negative 1 with negative 2, it should give you the same answer when it is positive 1. So 4 times 1 squared, 4. 4 times 1 squared is 4. 4 minus 6, negative 2. 4 times 2 squared. 2 squared is 4. Times this 4 is 16. Minus 6 is 10. So therefore, this is your answer. Okay? All right, now let us do this one. We've been told to graph the functions. I need a sharp pencil. Give me 1 second. I sharpen my pencil. Okay. So you are drawing your function table. You pick some negative numbers, some positive numbers. Negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0. 0 should always be in the middle. 1, 2, 3. I'll do the same here. Negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay? Always follow them in order from least to greatest, like that. Now, we do this. There is a negative 1 over here. So this means negative 1 bracket negative 3 squared. This means negative 1 bracket negative 2 squared. X is negative 2. Negative 1 bracket negative 1 squared. Negative 1 bracket 0 squared. Negative 1 bracket 1 squared. Negative 1 bracket 2 squared. Negative 1 bracket 3 squared. Negative 3 squared is positive 9. Positive 9 times negative 1 is negative 9. Negative 2 squared is 4, positive. Positive 4 times negative 1 is negative 4. Negative 1 squared is positive 1 times negative 1, negative 1. This will be 0. I told you I'm not going to repeat the multiplying. I just write my answer. Negative 1, negative 4, negative 9. Okay? If I want to do it, you can do it. 1 squared is 1 times negative 1, negative 1. 2 squared is 4 times negative 1, negative 4. 3 squared is 9 times negative 1 is negative 9. Okay? Now, let us do this side. So here we're going to do 2 bracket negative 3 squared minus 2. And 2 bracket negative 2 squared minus 2. 2 bracket negative 1 squared minus 2. 2 bracket 0 squared minus 2. 2 bracket 1 squared minus 2. 2 bracket 2 squared minus 2. And 2 bracket 3 squared minus 2. Okay, negative 3 squared is 9. Times 2 is 18. 18 minus 2 is 16. Negative 2 squared is 4. Times 2 is 8. 8 minus 2 is 6. Negative 1 squared is 1. Times 2 is 2. 2 minus 2 is 0. Okay. 0 squared times 2 is 0. 0 minus 2 is negative 2. 1 squared is 1 times 2 is 2. 2 minus 2 is 0. Okay. Then you continue. 2 squared is 4 times 2 is 8 minus 2 is 6. 3 squared is 9 times 2 is 18 minus 2 is 16. Now you graph. You graph your points. So you write your points. Negative 3, comma, negative 9. Negative 2, comma, negative 4. Negative 1, comma, negative 1. I'm taking the x and the y and I'm making a point. 0 with 0. 1 with negative 1. 2 with negative 4. And 3 with negative 9. Then I plot. So I go here. 3, negative 9. 3 with negative 9. I put my dot. 3. Said 3, yeah? No, negative 3. Negative 3 with negative 9. Negative 2 with negative 4. Negative 1 with negative 1. 0 with 0. And then I just come this way. I don't even need to look at my graph again. I just follow. This is 2 points, this is 2 boxes away. Then the next one will be here. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Just like that. And if I check, then you just join. Follow your dots. It should make a U. Okay? Because I'm holding the phone, that's why my line is not, it should be curved nicely. Like that. Okay? And how do I know I am correct? My x is negative, my graph is going down. My x squared, sorry. My x squared is negative, so my graph is opening downwards. So that's how I know I am correct. Now, here my x squared is positive, so my graph should go up. So -3 and 16, I don't have that, so I can't graph. So I will start with -2 and 6. -2 and 6. And then -1 and 0. And then 0 and -2. And then 1 and 0. And then 2 and 6. Since I don't have 16, I don't have to graph. And then I just join my points like that. And put the arrows at the end of your line. Okay? So that's how your graph should be. You just connect the points. Okay. Let us do the parts of a graph, and then the parts of an equation, and then we will do from the book how to use the equations. Okay? Now, there are 4 parts to a quadratic function. Axis of symmetry, the vertex can either be a maximum or a minimum. The x-intercepts and the y-intercepts. Remember, the x-intercepts are called solutions. And x-intercept is when your graph is crossing the x-axis, okay? Now, if we look at this one, this is the axis of symmetry because it cuts the graph into 2 parts. So the y-axis over here is the axis of symmetry. Axis of symmetry. Because it cuts the graph into 2 equal parts. Because it cuts the graph into 2 equal parts, or it's in the middle of the graph. Okay? This point where your graph is turning, this point right here, is called the vertex. It is a point. Now, because it's opening upward, it is the minimum. Minimum because the graph is opening upward. Minimum goes with up, okay? Remember that. Remember the vertex is a point. So that means you have to give the x and the y. If they ask you what is the vertex, you need to give x and y. If they ask you what is the minimum, you need to give x and y. If they ask you what is a minimum, you choose the graph that is going up. That's where you find the minimum, from the graph that is going up, here at the bottom. Now, this also happens to be the y-intercept, because this is where your graph is crossing the y-axis. So this is also the y-intercept, because the graph is crossing the y-axis. Now, this graph does not have x-intercepts. Oh no, it has one. No, it doesn't. Because it's not touching, it's not crossing, it is just on top of the x-axis. Yes, this graph does not have x-intercepts. But, well, you can say it has 0, 0. Because that's where it's touching the x-axis at 0. Yes, it has only one x-intercept, okay? This graph has only one x-intercept. Now, the graph that crosses the y-axis, and the y-axis is the axis of symmetry. The y-intercept, the vertex, and the x-intercept is the same. Right here. It only has one. Okay? Because the axis of symmetry is the y-axis. Okay? Now let's look over this one. This one is different. So this one here is our vertex. You see, they even labeled it for us. This is our vertex. It is a minimum. Then the axis of symmetry is this one right here. Make sure you use a ruler to draw it. The axis of symmetry is x equals to 2. Axis of symmetry. Where the middle part of your graph. This line is cutting the graph into 2 parts. Now, this is your y-intercept right here. Y-intercept 0,5. There is no x-intercept because this graph is not touching the x-axis. This graph does not have x-intercepts because it does not cross the x-axis. Okay? Since this graph is not touching the x-axis, there's no x-intercepts. But there is a y-intercept because it's crossing the y-axis. There is a vertex, and we've said it is a minimum, and the minimum is 2, 1, right here, 2, 1. 2, 1, like that. Remember, minimum is a point. Axis of symmetry is a line. It will always be x equals to something. So x equals that number where it crosses the x-axis. Over here it is x equals to 2. Okay, now let us do this one. Here is our, so this is x-intercept, x-intercept. This is both x-intercept and y-intercept. This one, x-intercept and y-intercept. No. Yes, this is the y-axis right here. See, this is the y-axis, this is the x-axis. Yes, so this is the x-intercept and it is also the y-intercept together right here. Okay? Then, here is your apex of symmetry right here. See, this is your apex of symmetry. Apex of symmetry. What is the equation? X equals to -2. Because it's a vertical line, the equation starts with x. It is -2 because it's crossing x at -2. Now, this solution is -4, 0. That's one solution. Another solution is 0, 0. The solutions are only the x-intercepts. Those are the solutions. Okay? Your y-intercept is also 0, 0. Now you want to know if you have a maximum or a minimum. You have a maximum. All graphs that open downwards is the maximum. So this is a vertex. It's called a vertex. And which vertex? The maximum. And it is a point. So that is negative 2, 4. Negative 2, 4. Like that. So the vertex is called a maximum. And you put the point there and you go to x. You get the x number. You go to y, you get the y number. Now let's do this. This y-axis is our axis of symmetry. Axis of symmetry. What is the equation? X equals to 0 because it crosses the x-axis at 0. This is our vertex. This is our vertex. Because the graph is opening downwards, it is a maximum. And what is the answer? 0, 0. Okay. This is also our y-intercept right there because that's where the line crosses the y-axis. Y-intercept, which is 0, 0. Okay, and then the solution is also 0, 0. The solution is also 0, 0 because it is the x-intercept. Because it is the only x-intercept. Spell correctly. X-intercept. Now, notice there's only one x-intercept. This graph is only touching the x-axis at one point. So that's why we wrote only 0, 0. Okay? That's it. So we've done parts of the graph. Let's do parts to the quadratic equation. So this is the standard form of the quadratic equation. That's how you write the standard form, okay? So this part is called the quadratic term because a is not equals to 0 and because x is squared. This is called the linear term because x does not have an exponent. And this is called a constant because you don't have an x with this, okay? So now let's look at the graph in our books and learn how to use them. So the function d 4t squared, d is equals to 4t squared.